Chapter 97. The Road for Belgium. A few minutes after the scene of confusion produced by the sudden appearance of the brigadier of the gendarmerie in Monsieur Danglars' house, and the revelation that followed, the vast mansion had emptied with much the same haste as would have followed the announcement of a case of the plague or cholera among the guests. In a few minutes everyone had hurried to leave, or rather to flee, by every door, down every stairway, or out of every exit. This was one of those circumstances in which one should not even try to offer the trite consolations that make the best of friends so unwelcome in the event of a great catastrophe. No one remained in the banker's mansion except Danglars, shut up in his study with the officer gendarme, Madame Danglars, terrified in the boudoir with which we are already acquainted, and Eugénie, who, with her proud eyes and scornfully curled lips, had retired to her room with her inseparable companion, Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. As for the many servants, even more numerous that evening than usual because they had been joined for the occasion by the ice-cream chefs, cooks, and maîtres d'hôtel of the Café de Paris, they were standing around in groups in the pantries and the kitchens, or in their rooms, turning against their masters the anger they felt at what they called this affront to them, and not at all bothered about their domestic duties, which had in any case naturally been suspended. In the midst of these various people, all agitated by their own interests, only two deserve our attention, Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars and Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. The young fiancée, as we mentioned, had retired with a haughty air and a curled lip, and with the bearing of an insulted queen, followed by her companion, who was paler and more disturbed than she was. When they got to her room, Eugénie locked the door from the inside, while Louise slumped into a chair. "Oh, my God, what a dreadful thing!" said the young musician. "Whoever could have imagined it? Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, an assassin, an escaped convict, a criminal!" An ironic smile formed on Eugénie's lips. "I really am fated," she said. "I escape from Morcerf and find Cavalcanti." "Oh, Eugénie, don't confuse one with the other. Be quiet. All men are scoundrels, and I am happy to be able to do more than hate them. Now I despise them." "What can we do?" Louise asked. "What shall we do?" "Yes. The very thing we should have done 3 days ago. Leave." "So, as you are not getting married, you still want to?" "Listen, Louise. I abhor this society life, ordered, measured, and ruled out like our sheets of music paper. What I've always wanted, aspired to, and yearned for is an artist's life, free, independent, where one depends only on oneself and is responsible only to oneself. Why should we stay? So that they will try in a month's time to marry me off again? To whom? Perhaps to Monsieur Debray. They did consider it for a while. No, Louise, no. This evening's adventure will be my excuse. I didn't look for it, I didn't ask for it. God sent it, and I welcome it." "How strong and courageous you are," the fragile young blonde said to her dark-haired companion. "Surely you know me by now. Come, Louise, let's discuss the whole matter. The carriage was purchased 3 days ago, luckily. Did you have it taken where we are to join it?" "Yes." "And our passport?" "Here it is." And Eugénie, with her usual sang-froid, unfolded the document and read, "Monsieur Léon d'Armilly, 20 years old, an artist by profession, black hair, black eyes, travelling with his sister." "Wonderful! How did you obtain this passport?" "I went and asked Monsieur de Monte Cristo for letters to the directors of the theatres in Rome and Naples, telling him that I was afraid to travel as a woman. He quite understood my feelings, and offered to get me a man's passport. 2 days later, I received this one, and added, with my own hands, travelling with his sister." "Fine," Eugénie said merrily. "Now all that's left is to pack our trunks." We'll leave on the evening of signing the contract instead of leaving on the wedding night, that's all. Think carefully, Eugenie. Oh, I've thought enough about it. I'm tired of hearing about nothing but reports, ends of the month, rises, falls, Spanish funds, Haitian paper. Instead of that, Louise, don't you see? The air, freedom, the song of the birds, the plains of Lombardy, the canals of Venice, the palaces of Rome, the beach at Naples. How much have we got, Louise? The young woman answered by taking a little locked wallet out of an inlaid bureau, opening it and counting 23 banknotes. 23,000 francs, she said. And at least as much again in pearls, diamonds and jewels, said Eugenie. We are rich. With 45,000 francs we can live like princesses for 2 years, or more modestly for 4. But in less than 6 months, you with your music and I with my voice, we shall have doubled our capital. Come, you take the money, I'll look after the jewel box, so that if one of us is unlucky enough to lose her treasure, the other will still have hers. Now, the suitcase, quickly, the suitcase. Wait, Louise said, going to listen at Madame Danglars' door. What are you afraid of? Being surprised. The door's closed. Suppose they tell us to open it. Let them say what they like, we won't open. You're a real Amazon, Eugenie. With a prodigious show of activity, the 2 girls began to throw everything they thought they would need on their journey into a trunk. There, said Eugenie. Now, while I get changed, you close the case. Louise pressed with all the strength of her little hands on the lid of the trunk. I can't do it, she said. I'm not strong enough. You close it. Of course, Eugenie said with a laugh. I was forgetting that I'm Hercules and you're just a feeble homme fatale. And putting her knee on the trunk, she stiffened her 2 white muscular arms until the 2 halves of the case met, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly had slid the bar of the padlock through the 2 hooks. When this was done, Eugenie opened a cupboard with a key she had on her and brought out a travelling cloak in quilted violet silk. Here, she said, you can see I've thought of everything. With this on, you won't be cold. What about you? Oh, I don't feel the cold, as you know. In any case, dressed as a man. Are you going to dress here? Certainly. But will you have time? Don't worry, chicken heart. No one is thinking of anything except the great affair. And what is there so surprising about my shutting myself in my room when you think of how desperate I must be? No, that's true. You've reassured me. Come on, give me a hand. And from the same drawer out of which she had taken the cloak that she had just given Mademoiselle d'Armilly, and which the latter had put around her shoulders, she took a complete set of men's clothes, from the boots to the frock-coat, with a supply of linen which included all the essentials, but nothing unnecessary. Then, with a rapidity that showed this was surely not the first time that she had, for fun, put on the clothes of the other sex, Eugenie pulled on the boots, slipped into the trousers, rumpled her cravat, buttoned a high-necked waistcoat up to the top, and got into a frock-coat that outlined her slender, well-turned waist. "Oh, that's very good. It's truly very good indeed," Louise said, looking admiringly at her. "But what about your lovely black hair? Those splendid locks that were the envy of every woman. Will they fit under a man's hat like the one I see there?" "You'll see," said Eugenie, and with her left hand she grasped the thick plait of hair which her slender fingers could barely reach around, while with the right she took a long pair of scissors. Very soon the steel blades were squeaking in the midst of the magnificent and luxuriant head of hair, which fell in tresses around the young woman's feet as she bent backwards to prevent it covering her coat. Then, when the hair on the crown of her head was cut, she turned to the sides, shearing them without the slightest sign of remorse. On the contrary, her eyes shone, more sparkling and joyful than usual under her ebony black brows. "Oh, your lovely hair," said Louise regretfully. "Don't I look 100 times better like this?" Eugenie asked, smoothing down the few curls left on her now entirely masculine haircut. Don't you think I'm more beautiful as I am?" "Oh, you are beautiful, beautiful still," Louise cried. "Now, where are we going?" "To Brussels, if you like. It's the nearest frontier. We'll travel through Brussels, Liège and Aix-la-Chapelle, then up the Rhine to Strasbourg, across Switzerland and into Italy by the Saint-Gothard Pass. Agreed?" "Of course." "What are you looking at?" You are truly adorable like that. Anyone would say you were abducting me." "By God, they'd be right." "Oh, Eugenie, I think you swore." And the two girls, whom anyone would have expected to be plunged in misery, one on her own account, the other out of devotion to her friend, burst out laughing while they set about clearing up the most obvious signs of the mess that had naturally accompanied the preparations for their flight. Then the two fugitives blew out their lights, and with eyes peeled, ears pricked, and necks craned, they opened the door to a dressing room which gave access to the service stairs leading down to the courtyard. Eugenie went first, holding the suitcase in one hand, while Mademoiselle d'Armilly struggled with the opposite handle in both of hers. The courtyard was empty. Midnight had just struck. The concierge was still on duty. Eugenie crept up and saw the trusty guard asleep at the back of his lodge, spread out across a chair. She went back to Louise, picked up the case which she had put down for a moment, and the two of them, keeping to the shadow cast by the wall, reached the porch. Eugenie got Louise to hide behind the door so that the concierge, if he should chance to wake up, would only see one person. Then, herself standing in the full glare of the lamp lighting the courtyard, she cried, "Door!" in her finest contralto voice, knocking on the window. The concierge got up, as Eugenie had anticipated, and even took a few steps to try and recognise the person who was going out, but, seeing a young man impatiently tapping his trouser leg with his cane, he opened immediately. Louise at once slid like an adder through the half-open door and lightly bounded outside. Eugenie followed, apparently calm, though it is quite probable that her heart was beating faster than it usually did. A delivery man was passing, so they asked him to take charge of the trunk, and the two young women told him they were going to the Rue de la Victoire and to number 36 in that street. Then they followed behind the man, whose presence Louise found reassuring. As for Eugenie, she was as strong as a Judith or Delilah. They arrived at the door of number 36. Eugenie told the delivery man to put the trunk down, gave him a few small coins, and, after knocking at the shutter, sent him on his way. The shutter on which Eugenie had tapped belonged to a little washerwoman who had been forewarned of their arrival. She had not yet gone to bed, so she opened up. "Mademoiselle," Eugenie said, "have the concierge bring the barouche out of the coach-house and send him to fetch horses from the post. Here are 5 francs for this trouble." "I do admire you," Louise said. "I might even say that I respect you." The washerwoman looked on in astonishment, but as it was agreed that she should have 20 louis for herself, she did not pass any remark on the matter. A quarter of an hour later, the concierge came back with the postilion and the horses. The latter were immediately harnessed to the carriage, on which the concierge fastened the trunk with a rope and a clasp. "Here's the passport," said the postilion. "Which route does the young gentleman wish to take?" "To Fontainebleau," Eugenie replied in an almost masculine voice. "What did you say?" Louise asked. "I'm putting them off the scent," Eugenie said. "That woman took 20 louis from us, but she could betray us for 40. When we reach the boulevard, we'll change course." And, hardly touching the running board, she leapt into the britska, which had been fitted out as an excellent sleeping compartment. "You are always right, Eugenie," the singing teacher said, taking her place next to her friend. A quarter of an hour later, the postilion had been put back on the correct road and was cracking his whip as he drove through the barrier at Saint-Martin. "Ah," Louise said with a sigh, "we're out of Paris." "Yes, my sweet, and the abduction has been well and truly accomplished, Eugenie replied. But without violence, said Louise. I'll offer that in mitigation, said Eugenie, but her words were drowned in the noise made by the carriage as it rumbled across the cobbles at La Villette. Monsieur Danglars had a daughter no longer. Chapter 98. The Inn of the Bell and Bottle. Let us leave Mademoiselle Danglars and her friend bowling along the Brussels road and return to poor Andrea Cavalcanti, who had been so inopportunely halted in his bid for fortune. Despite his tender years, Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti was a most adept and intelligent young man. So, as we saw, when the very first rumours began to filter into the drawing-room, he gradually made his way to the door, then through one or two rooms, and finally vanished. One thing that we forgot to add, though it deserves to be mentioned, is that one of the rooms through which Cavalcanti passed was that in which the bride's trousseau was exhibited. Caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, lace from Valenciennes and English veils. In short, everything that goes to make up that mass of tempting objects, the wedding presents that are known as les corbeilles. The word alone is enough to make a young girl's heart flutter. What shows that Andrea was not only a very intelligent man and very adept, but also a most provident young man, is that, as he ran through the room, he seized the most valuable of the jewels on display. Then, with this provision for his journey, he felt himself lighter by half as he jumped out of the window and slipped between the fingers of the gendarme. Tall and well-built like a Greek wrestler, muscular as a Spartan warrior, Andrea sped on for a quarter of an hour without knowing where he was heading, his one aim being to put as much distance as possible between himself and the place which he had nearly been caught. He had set off from the Rue de Mont Blanc, and with that instinct for barriers that thieves possess in the same way that a hare knows the way to its form, he found himself at the end of the Rue Lafayette. Here, panting for breath, he stopped. He was entirely alone, alone with the vast desert of the Clos Saint-Lazare on his left, and on the right the full extent of Paris itself. Am I lost? He wondered. No, not if I can achieve a greater burst of activity than my enemies. So my salvation boils down to a simple matter of kilometres. At that moment he observed a licensed cab coming up the boulevard Pontsinouer. Its driver, glumly smoking his pipe, seemed bent on reaching the outer limits of the Faubourg Saint-Denis, which was no doubt the place where he was normally stationed. "Hello, my friend," Benedetto called. "What is it, my good sir?" the coachman asked. "Is your horse tired?" "Tired? Very funny. He's done nothing all day. 4 miserable fares and 20 sous in tips, that's 7 francs in all, and I have to give 10 to my boss." "Would you like to add these 20 francs to the 7 you have?" "Only too happy, sir. 20 francs are not to be sniffed at. What do you want me to do for them?" "Something very simple if your horse is not too tired." "I'll tell you, he'll go like the wind. All we need to know is which way he has to go." "Towards Louvre." Yes, I know. The place where the ratafia comes from?" "That's it. All we have to do is catch one of my friends with whom I'm due to go hunting tomorrow at La Chapelle-en-Serval. He was to have waited for me here with his cab until 11:30. It's midnight now, so I suppose he got tired of waiting and set off on his own." "Quite likely so." "Well, can you try to catch him up?" "I'd be only too delighted." "If we don't catch him between here and Le Bourget, you'll have 20 francs. If we don't catch him before Louvre, 30. "And if we do catch him?" 40, Andrea said, after hesitating for a moment, then realizing that he was quite safe in promising. "Done," said the driver. "Hop in and we'll be off." Andrea jumped into the cab and they sped rapidly across the Faubourg Saint-Denis, down the Faubourg Saint-Martin, through the barrier, and into the endless suburbs of La Villette. He made sure that they didn't meet up with the mythical friend, but from time to time he would ask after a green cab with a piebald horse from late passers-by or at still open cabarets. As there are a good number of carriages on the road to the Netherlands, and 9/10 of the cabs are green, there was no shortage of information. The coach had always just passed. It was 500 or 200 or 100 yards ahead. Then they overtook it. It was the wrong one. On one occasion, their cab itself was overtaken by a barouche swept along at a gallop by 2 post-horses. Ah, Cavalcanti thought, if only I had that barouche, those 2 good horses, and most of all the passport one would need to obtain them. And he gave a deep sigh. The barouche was the one carrying Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly. "Forward!" Andrea said. "Keep going. We must catch him soon." And the poor horse resumed the furious trot that it had maintained since they left Paris and arrived, steaming, in Louvre. "Decidedly," said Andrea, "I can see that I am not going to catch up with my friend and that I shall kill your horse. Better stop now. Here are your 30 francs. I'll sleep at the Cheval Rouge and take the first coach where I can find a spare seat. Good night, friend." He pressed 6 5-franc pieces into the driver's hand and jumped lightly onto the pavement. The coachman joyfully put the money in his pocket and set off at a walk down the Paris road. Andrea pretended to go to the inn, but after stopping for a moment by the door and hearing the sound of the cab fading into the distance, he carried on, and, at a brisk trot, covered 2 leagues before stopping to rest. By this time he must have been very close to La Chapelle-en-Serval, where he had said he was going. It was not tiredness that stopped Andrea. It was the need to take a decision, the need to fix on a plan. It was impossible for him to get into a stagecoach, and equally impossible to take the mail. For either a passport was essential. It was also impossible, especially for a man as expert as Andrea was in criminal matters, to imagine staying in the département of the Oise, which is one of the most exposed and closely watched in France. Andrea sat down on the edge of a ditch, put his head between his hands, and thought. 10 minutes later he looked up. He had come to a decision. He was wearing a sleeveless jacket which he had managed to seize from its hanger in the antechamber and button over his evening dress, and this he smeared with dust down one side. Then, marching into La Chapelle-en-Serval, he boldly went up to the door of the only inn in the village and knocked. The landlord opened. "My friend," Andrea said, "I was on my way from Montfortin to Senlis when my horse, which is a troublesome beast, shied and threw me. I must get to Compiègne tonight or my family will be very worried about me. Do you have a horse I could hire?" Good, bad, or indifferent, an innkeeper always has a horse. This particular one called his stable boy, ordered him to saddle the Grey, and woke up his son, a child of 7 years old, who would mount up behind the gentleman and bring the animal back. Andrea gave the innkeeper 20 francs, and as he was taking them from his pocket, let fall a visiting card. This card belonged to one of his friends from the Café de Paris. The result was that the innkeeper, when Andrea had gone and he picked up the card that had fallen from his pocket, was convinced he had hired his horse to Monsieur le Comte de Mauleon of 25 Rue Saint-Dominique, this being the name and address on the card. The Grey was not a fast mover, but steady and conscientious. In 3.5 hours Andrea had covered the 9 leagues separating him from Compiègne. 4 o'clock was striking on the town hall clock when he came into the square where the stagecoaches drew up. There is an excellent hostelry in Compiègne which even those who have stayed there only once will remember. Andrea had stopped here on one of his excursions around Paris, and he recalled the Bell and Bottle. He took his bearings, saw the inn sign by the light of a street lamp, and, after sending the boy away with all the small change he had on him, knocked at the door, rightly judging that he had 2 or 3 hours in front of him, and that the best thing was to prepare for future exertions with a good sleep and a good supper. A young lad opened the door. "My friend," Andrea said, "I have just come from Saint-Jean-au-Bourg, where I had dinner. I was counting on taking the coach that goes through here at midnight, but like an idiot I got lost and have been wandering around the woods for the past 4 hours. So would you be kind enough to give me one of those pretty little rooms overlooking the courtyard and send up a cold chicken with a bottle of claret?" The boy was quite unsuspecting. Andrea's voice was completely composed. He had a cigar in his mouth and his hands in the pockets of his jacket. His clothes were smart, his beard fresh, and his boots beyond reproach. He looked like a gentleman up late, nothing more. While the boy was preparing Andrea's room, the hostess got up. Andrea greeted her with his most charming smile and asked if he might have number 3, which he had occupied last time he was here in Compiègne. Unfortunately, number 3 was already occupied by a young man travelling with his sister. Andrea seemed utterly downcast, and was only consoled when the hostess assured him that number 7, which was being got ready for him, had precisely the same outlook as number 3. Warming his feet and chatting about the latest Chantilly races, he waited for them to announce that his room was ready. Andrea had had good reason to talk of those pretty rooms overlooking the yard. The courtyard of the Bell and Bottle, with the 3 tiers of galleries which make it seem like a theatre, with the jasmine and clematis which lightly entwine its pillars like a natural decoration, is one of the most lovely inn-yards anywhere in the world. The chicken was fresh, the wine was old, the fire crackled brightly. Andrea was surprised to find himself dining as heartily as though nothing had happened. Then he went to bed and fell asleep almost immediately, with that relentless sleep that a man always has at 20 years old, however much his conscience troubles him. Though we are forced to confess that while Andrea's conscience had good reason to trouble him, it did nothing of the sort. This is Andrea's plan, which accounted for most of his feeling of security. When day broke, he would get up and leave the hotel, after scrupulously settling his bill. He would make for the forest, and, on the pretence of a desire to do some studies in oils, he would rent a room from a peasant. He would obtain a woodcutter's costume and an axe, exchanging the lion's clothes for those of a peasant. Then, with hands covered in earth, his hair coloured by using a lead comb, and his complexion darkened by a dye prepared to a recipe given him by his former comrades, he would go from one stretch of woodland to the next, until he reached the nearest frontier, walking by night and sleeping by day in the woods or quarries, and not going near any human habitation except to buy a loaf of bread from time to time. Once he was across the frontier, he would convert his diamonds into cash and consolidate the money into a dozen bank drafts, which he would always carry with him in case of accident. He would once more be the possessor of some 50,000 livres, which, to his mind, did not seem too bad a second best. Apart from that, he was counting on the interest that the Danglars would have in hushing up their misfortune. This is why, apart from sheer tiredness, Andrea went to sleep so quickly and slept so well. As an additional precaution, Andrea had not closed his shutters so that the light would wake him. Otherwise, he had merely bolted the door and left open on his bedside table a certain very sharp knife, which he knew to be of excellent quality and which never left him. About 7 o'clock, Andrea was woken by a bright, warm ray of sunshine which settled on his face. In every well-organised mind, the dominant idea, and there always is a dominant idea, is the one which, being the last to go to sleep, is also the first to shine among the newly awakened thoughts. Andrea had not fully opened his eyes before the dominant idea seized him, telling him that he had overslept. He leapt out of bed and ran over to the window. A gendarme was crossing the yard. A gendarme is one of the most striking objects there is, even in the eyes of a man whose conscience is untroubled, but for a timid soul, or one which has some reason for anxiety, the yellow, blue and white of a gendarme's uniform take on a terrifying hue. Why this gendarme? Andrea wondered. Then he answered his own question with the logic that the reader will already have noticed in him. There is nothing surprising about a gendarme in an inn, but let's get dressed, even so. And he dressed with a speed that the possession of a valet had not diminished in the few months of fashionable life he had led in Paris. Good, Andrea said as he dressed. I shall wait for him to leave, and when he does so, I shall sneak out. As he said these words, freshly booted and cravatted, Andrea quietly went across to the window and once more lifted the net curtain. Not only had the first gendarme not left, but the young man saw a second blue, yellow and white uniform at the foot of the staircase, the only one down which he could go, and a third, on horseback, with a carbine in his hand, was doing sentry duty at the main door, the only one through which he could reach the road. This third gendarme was highly significant, because behind him stood a semicircle of onlookers blocking the door. "They're after me," was Andrea's first thought. "Damnation!" The colour drained from his face, and he looked around anxiously. His room, like all those on that floor, only gave onto the external gallery, which was open to all eyes. "I am lost," was Andrea's second thought. In reality, for a man in Andrea's situation, arrest meant the assizes, sentencing and death. Death without mercy and without delay. For a minute he crushed his head convulsively between his hands, and in that moment he nearly went mad with fear. Soon, however, from the host of thoughts milling around in his head, one hope emerged. A pale smile appeared on his wan lips and his taut cheeks. He looked around. The things he was looking for were on the marble top of a bureau: a pen, paper and ink. He dipped the pen in the ink and wrote, in a hand which he forced to remain firm, the following lines on the first leaf of the pad. "I have no money to pay you, but I am not a dishonest man. As security, I am leaving this pin, which must be worth 10 times my bill. Please forgive me for leaving at daybreak. I was ashamed." He took out his tie pin and put it on the sheet of paper. Having done this, instead of leaving the room locked, he drew back the bolts and even left the door ajar, as if he had gone out of the room and forgotten to shut it behind him. Then, like a man who was used to this kind of exercise, he slipped into the chimney, pulling to behind him the paper screen representing Achilles with Deidamia, rubbing out with his feet even the traces of his footprints in the ashes, and began to climb up the arching tube that offered him the only means of escape in which he could still trust. At that very moment, the first gendarme whose appearance had struck Andrea was climbing the staircase, preceded by the commissioner of police and covered by the second gendarme who was guarding the bottom of the stairs and could himself call for reinforcements from the one at the door. Here are the circumstances to which Andrea owed this visit, and the considerable efforts he was making to receive his guests. At first light, the telegraphs had come into operation in all directions. In every locality, almost immediately informed, the relevant authorities had been woken up and the forces of law and order launched in pursuit of Caderousse's murderer. Compiègne, as a royal residence, a hunting town and a garrison town, has an abundance of officials, gendarmes and police commissioners. Consequently, as soon as the telegraph order arrived, the searches began. The Bell and Bottle Inn is the main hotel in town, so naturally that is where they started. Moreover, reports from the sentries who that night were on guard outside the town hall, which is adjacent to the inn, stated that several travellers had arrived during the night at the hostelry. The sentry who had been relieved at 6 in the morning even recalled the moment after he had taken up his post, that is to say, at a few minutes past 4, having seen a young man riding a white horse with a little peasant boy behind him, the said young man dismounting in the main square and sending away the boy and his horse, then going and knocking at the door of the Bell and Bottle, which opened then shut behind him. This young man, who was up at that late hour, was the object of suspicion, and this young man was none other than Andrea. On the basis of this information, the commissioner of police and the gendarme, who was a brigadier, were proceeding towards Andrea's door. They found it ajar. "Oh ho!" said the brigadier, a wily old fox skilled in the tricks of his trade. "Bad sign, an open door. I'd rather see it triple locked." Indeed, the little note and the pin which Andrea had left on the table confirmed the sad fact, or at least tended to do so. Andrea had gone. I say tended because the brigadier was not a man to close a case on one piece of evidence. He looked around him, under the bed, behind the curtains, in the cupboards, and finally stopped at the chimney. Thanks to Andrea's precautions, there was no sign of his footsteps in the ashes. However, this was still a way out, and in the present circumstances every exit had to be seriously investigated. So, the brigadier called for some wood and some straw, stuffed it into the chimney as he might a mortar, and lit it. The fire made the brick walls crack, and a thick column of smoke rose through the passages and towards the sky like a dark plume from a volcano, but it did not bring down the prisoner as the brigadier expected. The reason was that Andrea, having been at war with society all his life, was at least a match for a gendarme, even one who had risen to the respectable rank of brigadier. Anticipating the fire, he had climbed out onto the roof and was hiding behind the chimney stack. For a moment he hoped he might be saved, because he heard the brigadier calling the two gendarmes and shouting to them, "He's gone!" But, craning his neck, he saw that the men, instead of going away, which would be the normal thing as soon as they heard this, had in fact doubled in vigilance. He in turn looked around him. On his right, like a dark rampart, was the town hall, a huge 16th century building, and from the windows and openings of this pile you could see every nook and cranny on the roof, just as you can see into a valley from a mountain. Andrea realised that at any moment he would see the head of the brigadier or of the gendarmerie appear at one of those openings. If he was seen, he was lost. He had no hope of escaping in a rooftop chase. He therefore resolved to get down, not through the chimney by which he had come up, but by some similar path. He looked for a chimney from which no smoke was rising, crawled across the roof to it, and vanished down it without anyone seeing him. At the same moment, a little window in the town hall opened, and the brigadier of gendarmerie poked his head out of it. For a short while the head remained motionless like one of the stone gargoyles decorating the building. Then, with a long sigh of disappointment, it vanished. The brigadier, impassive and upright as the law he represented, walked through the crowd that had gathered on the square without replying to any of the 1,000 questions flung at him, and went back into the inn. "Well?" the two gendarmes asked in turn. "Well, lads," the brigadier replied, "the bandit must have got well away early this morning, but we shall send out along the roads to Villers-Cotterêts and Noyon, and scour the forest, and that is where, incontrovertibly—" The worthy officer had just given birth to this high-sounding adverb with the intonation peculiar to those of his kind, when a long cry of terror, accompanied by the frantic ringing of a bell, shook the courtyard of the inn. "Huh?" the brigadier cried. "What's that?" "There's a guest who seems in a great deal of a hurry," said the innkeeper. "What number is ringing?" "Number 3. So go there, boy." At that moment the cries and the sound of the bell increased in intensity. The boy started to run. "No, stop," said the brigadier, halting him. "It sounds to me as if the person ringing needs more than a waiter. We'll serve him a gendarme. Who's staying in number 3? "The little young man who arrived with his sister last night in a post-chaise and asked for a room with 2 beds. The bell rang again with an anguished tone. "Here, follow me," the brigadier called to the commissioner. "Follow me and hurry." "One moment," said the innkeeper. "There are 2 staircases to room number 3, internal and external." "Very well," the brigadier said. "I'll take the inside. Internal affairs are my department. Are the carbines loaded?" "Yes, brigadier." "Well, keep watch outside, the rest of you, and if he tries to escape, shoot. He's a master criminal, the telegraph says." The brigadier, followed by the commissioner, at once disappeared up the inside staircase, leaving a hum of excitement that his revelations about Andrea had awakened in the crowd. Here is what had happened. Andrea had very nimbly descended 2/3 of the way down the chimney, but when he got to that point he lost his footing, and, though he pressed with his hands, he came down faster and, in particular, more noisily than he would have wished. This would not have mattered if the room had been empty, but, as ill luck would have it, it was occupied. 2 women were sleeping in one bed, and the noise woke them up. They looked in the direction from which it had come, and saw a man appear in the fireplace. One of the women, the blonde, gave the dreadful cry that echoed through the whole house, while the other, who was a brunette, grasped the bell cord and gave the alarm by tugging it as hard as she could. Andrea, as one can see, was dogged by misfortune. "For pity's sake," he cried, pale and distraught, without seeing whom he was addressing. "For pity's sake, don't call anyone. Save me. I don't mean you any harm." "Andrea the murderer?" one of the young women exclaimed. Eugenie? Mademoiselle Danglars?" Cavalcanti muttered, going from terror to amazement. "Help! Help!" cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, seizing the bell-pull from Eugenie's lifeless hand and ringing even more energetically than her companion. "Save me, they're after me," Andrea said, clasping his hands. "For pity's sake, spare me, don't turn me in." "Too late, they're coming up," said Eugenie. "Then hide me somewhere. Say that you were afraid for no reason. You can allay suspicion and you will save my life." The 2 women, clasped in each other's arms, their blankets wrapped around them, remained deaf to this pleading voice. Every kind of apprehension, every sort of repugnance struggled in their minds. "All right, then," said Eugenie. "Go back the way you came, wretch. Leave, and we shall say nothing." "There he is! There he is!" cried a voice on the landing. "There he is! I can see him!" The brigadier had put his eye to the keyhole and had seen Andrea standing and begging. A heavy blow from the butt of a rifle broke the lock. 2 more loosed the bolts, and the door fell inwards. Andrea ran to the opposite door, which overlooked the gallery above the courtyard, and opened it, ready to jump. The 2 gendarmes were there, with their carbines levelled at him. He stopped dead. Standing, his face pale, his body bent slightly backwards, he clasped his useless knife tightly in his hand. "Run!" said Mademoiselle d'Armilly, pity filling her heart as fear drained from it. "Oh, run, do!" "Or kill yourself," said Eugenie, adopting the voice and posture of one of those vestals who, in the circus, would motion with their thumbs to order the victorious gladiator to finish off his stricken adversary. Andrea shuddered and looked at the young woman with a smile of contempt, proving that his corrupt nature did not understand this sublime ferocity of honour. "Kill myself?" he said, throwing down his knife. "What's the point of that?" "But you said it yourself," said Mademoiselle Danglars. "You'll be condemned to death and executed like a common criminal." "Ha!" Cavalcanti replied, folding his arms. "One has friends?" The brigadier came towards him, holding his sabre. "Come, come," said Cavalcanti. "Put up your sword, my good fellow. There's no sense in getting so worked up about it. I'll come quietly." And he held out his hands for the handcuffs. The 2 young women looked in horror at the hideous transformation taking place before their eyes, as the man of the world shuffled off his outer shell and became once more the convict. Andrea turned around to them, and with an impudent smile said, Do you have any message for your father, Mademoiselle Eugenie? Because in all probability I shall be returning to Paris." Eugenie buried her head in both hands. "Oh, come now," said Andrea. "There's no need to be ashamed. I don't blame you for catching the mail coach to chase after me. Why, I was almost your husband." And with this quip he went out, leaving the two fugitives a prey to the agonies of shame and the remarks of the crowd. An hour later, both dressed in women's clothes, they climbed into their travelling barouche. The door of the inn had been shut to keep them from constant scrutiny, but when the door was opened they still had to pass along a double line of onlookers, muttering and staring with eager eyes. Eugenie lowered the blinds, but even though she could no longer see, she could still hear, and the sound of sniggering reached her. "Oh, why is the world not a desert?" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the arms of Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her eyes blazing with that fury which made Nero wish that the Roman world had one neck so that he could cut it with a single blow. The following day they arrived at the Hôtel de Flandre in Brussels. By then, Andrea had already spent one night as a prisoner in the conciergerie. And I think there we shall take a break. Yes, Eugenie and Mademoiselle d'Armilly, definitely just friends. Definitely just friends. But yes. Hello, everyone. Est-ce que c'est gay? Yes, I'm pretty sure they're gay. I mean, it's kind of very clear. But good night to the people who went, and hello to, I believe, Ray Tracer and Guitar Cat. Welcome in. But yes, we shall take a break. So go do break-related things, and we shall be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. turn. Welcome back. I hope you all had a nice break. Also, welcome in Budot. I hope you are doing well. I like the fact that the fish talk got you in for some reason. Found a new way to summon Budot. Not that anyone wants a new way to summon Budot. I'm joking. But yes, I hope everybody has had a good break. I hope everybody is enjoying the story so far. Words are difficult for me today, as you can probably tell. I'm sort of a bit... but yes, I'm very much enjoying how Louise and Eugenie are just friends who just happen to be sleeping in the same bed and, have run away together. Just friends, and one of them is going to dress as a man. Definitely just friends. You can time him out here. Well, he hasn't said anything annoying yet. You join right before the fish talk. Well. It's just whatever. I hope you are well. Boo. I hope you're doing well. But yes, so we ended on page 1069. Nice. But yes, I like. When is Dumas gonna just stop calling them friends? Because they are obviously not just friends. Bless. It's very sweet. But yes, hope everybody has had a nice break. I reckon. Yeah, we can probably make it to the amount that I was planning on doing tonight. So that's very exciting. There we go. Right. Are we ready to continue? With Chapter 99, The Law. We have seen how Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly were left in peace to undergo their transformation and make their escape. The reason is that everyone was too preoccupied with his or her own affairs to bother with theirs. We shall leave the banker in a cold sweat as he drew up the huge columns of his liabilities to confront the spectre of bankruptcy, and follow the Baroness, who, after remaining momentarily crushed by the blow that had fallen on her, had gone to seek advice from her usual counsellor, Lucien Debray. The Baroness had been counting on the marriage to give up finally a guardianship which, with a daughter of Eugenie's character, could not be anything but a burden, because in those sorts of tacit agreements that establish the hierarchical links in a family, the mother is only truly able to command her daughter when she can offer her a continual example of wisdom and a model of perfection. Now Madame Danglars was in awe of Eugenie's perspicacity and the advice of Mademoiselle d'Armilly. She had intercepted certain contemptuous looks cast by her daughter in the direction of Debray, looks which seemed to indicate that Eugenie knew all about her amorous and financial relations with the private secretary. In fact, a better informed and closer examination would have told her that Eugenie detested Debray, not as a cause of disruption and scandal in her father's house, but quite simply because she classed him among those bipeds whom Diogenes tried to avoid describing as men, and Plato designated under the circumlocution two-footed animals without feathers. From her own point of view, and unfortunately in this world everyone has his or her own point of view which obscures that of others, from her point of view, then, Madame Danglars regretted infinitely that Eugenie's marriage had been broken off, not because the match was suitable, compatible, and destined to make her daughter happy, but because it would have given her back her own freedom. Consequently, as we have said, she hurried round to Debray's. Like everyone else in Paris, she had been present on the evening of the contract and had witnessed the scandal that followed, and had now lost no time in retiring to his club, where he was discussing with a few friends the event which was by now a subject of conversation for 3/4 of the inhabitants of the supremely talkative town, known as the capital of the world. Just as Madame Danglars, dressed in a black robe and hidden behind a veil, was climbing the stairs to Debray's apartment, despite the concierge's assurance that the young gentleman was not at home, Debray was engaged in refuting the arguments of a friend who had tried to persuade him that, after the dreadful scandal that had taken place, it was his duty as a friend of the house to marry Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars and her 2,000,000 francs. Debray was defending himself like a man who asks nothing better than to be defeated. The idea had often occurred to him of its own accord. But then, from time to time, knowing Eugénie, with her independent and haughty character, he would adopt a completely defensive attitude, saying that the match was impossible, yet meanwhile allowing himself to be secretly titillated by the wicked thought that, if moralists are to be believed, incessantly worries at the most honest and the purest of man, lurking in the depth of his soul like Satan behind the cross. The conversation, as one can see, was interesting, since it involved matters of such gravity and, with tea and gambling, lasted until 1 in the morning. Meanwhile, the valet had shown Madame Danglars into Lucien's apartment, where she waited, veiled and tremulous, in the little green drawing-room between 2 baskets of flowers that she herself had sent that morning, and which Debray, it must be said, had trimmed and set in tiers with a care that made the poor woman forgive his absence. At 20 to 12, Madame Danglars grew tired of waiting, got back in her cab, and had herself driven home. Society women have this in common with successful courtesans: they do not usually return home after midnight. The Baroness slipped back into the house as unobtrusively as Eugénie had left it. Her heart beating, she tiptoed up the stairs to her apartment, which, as we know, was next to Eugénie's. She was so afraid of causing tongues to wag, and, poor woman, respectable at least in this respect, believed so firmly in her daughter's innocence and attachment to the paternal home. When she got in, she listened at Eugénie's door, and then, hearing no sound, tried to open it, but the bolts were shut. Madame Danglars assumed that Eugénie, exhausted by the dreadful emotions of the evening, had gone to bed and was sleeping. She called the chambermaid and questioned her. "Mademoiselle Eugénie went to her room," the chambermaid said, "with Mademoiselle d'Armilly. Then they took tea together, and after that sent me away, saying that they had no further need of me." Since then the chambermaid had been in the servants' quarters, and, like everyone else, thought that the 2 young ladies were in their room. So Madame Danglars went to bed without the slightest suspicion, but though her mind was at rest as far as the participants were concerned, it worried about the events. As her ideas became clearer, the significance of the incident grew larger. It was no longer a mere scandal, it was a pandemonium. It was no longer a matter of shame, but of ignominy. Now the Baroness involuntarily recalled how pitiless she had been towards poor Mercedes, recently afflicted with as great a misfortune through her husband and her son. "Eugénie," she thought, "is ruined, and so are we. The affair, in the way it will be represented, covers us with opprobrium. In society such as ours, certain forms of ridicule are open wounds, bleeding and incurable. How fortunate," she murmured, "that God gave Eugénie that strange character which has so often been a cause of concern to me." And she looked gratefully up towards heaven, from which some mysterious providence arranges everything in advance, according to what will occur, and sometimes transforms a defect, or even a vice, into a piece of good fortune. Then her thoughts soared through space, like a bird extending its wings to cross an abyss, and alighted on Cavalcanti. That Andrea was a wretch, a thief, an assassin, yet the same Andrea had manners which indicated at least a half-education, if not a complete one. This same Andrea presented himself to society with an appearance of great wealth and the support of honourable names. How could she see her way through this puzzle? Whom could she ask for help in this cruel dilemma? As a woman, her first instinct, which sometimes proves fatal, had been to look for help from the man she loved, but Debray could only offer advice. She must turn to someone more powerful. This was when the Baroness thought of Monsieur de Villefort. It was Monsieur de Villefort who had wanted to have Cavalcanti arrested. It was Monsieur de Villefort who had piteously brought discord into the heart of her family, as if it had been foreign to him. But no, on reflection, the Crown Prosecutor was not a pitiless man. He was a judge and the prisoner of duty, a firm and loyal friend who, with an unrelenting but practised hand, had applied a scalpel to corruption. He was not an executioner, but a surgeon who wanted to cut Danglars' honour free from the ignominy of that irredeemable young man whom they had introduced to society as their son-in-law. If Monsieur de Villefort, a friend of the Danglars family, acted in this way, there was no further reason to suppose that the Crown Prosecutor had known anything in advance or had any complicity in Andrea's intrigues. So, on reflection, Villefort's conduct still appeared to the Baroness in a light that showed it to their mutual advantage. But here his inflexibility must stop. She would go and see him the next day and persuade him to agree, not to fail in his judicial duties, but at least to make full allowances for them. She would appeal to the past. She would refresh his memories and beg him in the name of a time that was guilty but happy. Monsieur de Villefort would be flexible about the matter, or at least for this he would only need to turn a blind eye. At least he would let Cavalcanti escape and prosecute the crime only against that shadow of a criminal who can be tried in absentia. Then, only then, would she sleep easily. The following day she got up at 9 o'clock, and without ringing for her chambermaid or giving any sign of life to anyone, she dressed, with the same simplicity as on the previous evening, then went down the stairs and out of the Danglars' residence, walked as far as the Rue de Provence, got into a cab, and had herself driven to Monsieur de Villefort's house. For the past month this accursed place had had the mournful appearance of a lazaretto during an outbreak of the plague. Some of the rooms were closed, inside and out. The closed shutters would only open to let in air, and then one might see a lackey's terrified face at the window, which would then shut like a tombstone falling back on a sepulchre, while the neighbours were whispering, "Shall we see another coffin come out of the Crown Prosecutor's house today?" Madame Danglars shuddered at the appearance of this desolate house. She got out of her cab, and her knees giving way beneath her, went up to the closed door and rang the bell. It was only at the third ring of the bell, whose mournful tinkling seemed to participate in the general sadness, that a concierge appeared, opening the door just wide enough to let out his words. He saw a woman, a lady, elegantly dressed, but despite this the door remained almost shut. "Come on," said the Baroness. "Open up." "Firstly, madame, who are you?" the concierge asked. "Who am I? But you know me perfectly well." "We don't know anyone any more, madame." "But, my good fellow, you're mad!" exclaimed the Baroness. "Where do you come from?" This really is too much." "Excuse me, madame. It's orders. Your name?" "Baroness Danglars. You've seen me 20 times." "Quite possibly, madame. Now what do you want?" "Oh, what a cheek! I'll complain to Monsieur de Villefort about the impertinence of his staff." "Madame, it's not impertinence, it's a precaution. No one comes in here without a word from Monsieur d'Avrigny, or without having business with the Crown Prosecutor." "Well, as it happens, I do have business with the Crown Prosecutor." "Urgent business?" "As you must see, since I have not yet got back into my carriage. But let's make an end of this. Here is my card. Take it to your master." "Will madame wait here?" "Yes, go on." The concierge closed the door, leaving Madame Danglars in the street. Admittedly, she did not have to wait long. A short time later, the door opened wide enough to admit her. She went through, and it closed behind her. Once they were in the courtyard, the concierge, without for a moment losing sight of the door, took a whistle out of his pocket and blew it. Monsieur de Villefort's valet appeared on the steps. "Madame must forgive that good fellow," he said, coming down to meet her. "He has precise orders, and Monsieur de Villefort asked me to tell Madame that he could not have done otherwise." Also in the courtyard there was a supplier, who had been admitted only after the same precautions, and whose merchandise was being examined. The Baroness went up the steps. She was deeply affected by the prevailing mood, which seemed, as it were, to extend the circle of her own melancholy. Still guided by the valet, she was shown into the magistrate's study without her guide once losing sight of her. Preoccupied though she was by what had brought her here, the reception she had been given by all these underlings seemed to her so undeserved that Madame Danglars started to complain. But Villefort raised a head so bowed down with sorrow and looked at her with such a sad smile that the complaint died on her lips. "Please excuse my servants for a regime of terror for which I cannot blame them. Suspect themselves, they have become suspicious." Madame Danglars had often heard people speak of this regime of terror which the judge mentioned, but if she had not seen it with her own eyes, she could never have believed that it could have been taken to this point. "So you too are unhappy?" she said. "Yes, madame," the judge replied. "Then you must feel for me." "I do, madame, sincerely." "And you understand why I'm here?" "You want to talk to me about what is happening to you, I suppose?" "Yes, monsieur, a terrible disaster." "You mean a mishap?" "A mishap?" the Baroness cried. "Alas, madame," the Crown Prosecutor replied imperturbably, "I have reached the point where I only describe what is irreparable as a disaster." "Ah, monsieur, do you think people will forget?" "People forget everything, madame," said Villefort. "Your daughter's marriage will take place tomorrow, if not today, or in a week, if not tomorrow. And as for regretting Mademoiselle Eugénie's intended spouse, I can't imagine you would do that." Madame Danglars stared at Villefort, amazed by this almost mocking imperturbability. "Am I in the presence of a friend?" she asked, in a voice full of pained dignity. "You know you are," Villefort replied, blushing as he gave this assurance. In fact, it alluded to events other than the ones that were on his mind and that of the Baroness at that moment. "Well then, my dear Villefort," the Baroness said, "be more affectionate. Speak to me as a friend and not as a judge, and when I am deeply unhappy, don't tell me I should be joyful." Villefort bowed. "When I hear tell of misfortunes, madame," he said, "I have, in the past 3 months, acquired the unfortunate habit of thinking about my own. This selfish comparison takes place in my mind in spite of itself. This is why, beside my misfortunes, yours seem to me a mishap. This is why, beside my dreadful situation, yours seem to me something to envy, but it upsets you, so let's forget it. You were saying, madame." "I have come to ask you, my friend," the Baroness resumed, "how the affair of this impostor stands at present." "Impostor?" Villefort repeated. "Assuredly, madame, you are determined to extenuate certain things and exaggerate others. Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather Monsieur Benedetto, an impostor? You are mistaken, madame. Monsieur Benedetto is nothing more or less than a murderer." "Monsieur, I don't deny that you are right to correct me, but the more harshly you arm yourself against this unfortunate, the harder you will strike our family. Come, forget him for the moment. Instead of pursuing him, let him escape." "You have come too late, madame. The orders have been given." "Well, if he is arrested, do you think they will arrest him?" "I hope so." if he is arrested... Listen, I hear that the prisons are overflowing. Well, leave him in prison. The Crown Prosecutor shook his head. At least until my daughter is married, the Baroness added. Impossible, madame. The law has its procedures. Even for me? The Baroness asked, half joking, half serious. For everyone, Villefort replied, and for me as for everyone else. Ah, the Baroness exclaimed, without putting into words what her thoughts had revealed by this exclamation. Villefort looked at her with the look he used to sound out a person's thoughts. I know what you mean, he said. You are referring to those dreadful rumours that are circulating, that there is something unnatural about all those deaths which over the past 3 months have clothed me in mourning, and the death from which Valentine has just escaped, as if by a miracle. I was not thinking of that, Madame Danglars hastened to say. Yes, madame, you were, and it's only fair, because you could not do otherwise than to think of it, and you were saying to yourself, you hunt out crime, so why are there crimes in your house that go unpunished? The Baroness blushed. You were thinking that, were you not, madame? I confess I was. Then I shall answer you. Villefort drew his chair up close to that of Madame Danglars, and, resting both hands on his desk and adopting a more subdued tone than usual, he said, There are crimes that go unpunished, because the criminals are not known, and one is afraid of striking an innocent head instead of a guilty one. But when these criminals are discovered... Here Villefort reached out his hand towards a crucifix hanging opposite his desk and repeated, When these criminals are discovered, by the living God, madame, whoever they are, they shall die. Now, after the oath I have just sworn, and which I shall keep, do you dare, madame, to ask my pardon for that wretch? Well, now, monsieur, said Madame Danglars, are you sure that he is as guilty as they say? Listen, here is his record. Benedetto, sentenced first of all to 5 years in the galleys for forgery at the age of 16. As you can see, the young man showed promise. Then an escaped convict, then a murderer. And who is he, the wretch? Who knows? A tramp, a Corsican? He has not been claimed by anyone? No one. His parents are unknown. But the man who came from Lucca? Another crook. His accomplice, perhaps. The Baroness clasped her hands. Villefort, she began in her sweetest and most cajoling tone. For God's sake, madame, the prosecutor replied, with a resolve that was somewhat unfeeling, for God's sake, never ask me to pardon a guilty man. What am I? The law. Does the law have eyes to see your sorrow? Does the law have ears to hear your soft pleadings? Does the law have a memory to make itself the conduit for your tender thoughts? No, madame. The law orders, and when it orders, it strikes. You will tell me that I am a living being and not a book of laws, a man, not a rule. Look at me, madame. Look around me. Have men treated me as a brother? Have they loved me? Have they considered me? Have they spared me? Has anyone ever begged pardon for Monsieur de Villefort? And has anyone ever granted a pardon to Monsieur de Villefort? No, no, no. Struck, and struck again. You insist, woman, siren that you are, in speaking to me with that charming and expressive look that reminds me I should blush. Yes, blush for what you know about, and perhaps for other things as well. But, in the end, since I myself failed and was found wanting, more profoundly perhaps than other men, well, since that time I have shaken out their clothes to discover a blemish, and I have always found it. I will say more, I have found it with joy, this evidence of human weakness and perversity. Every man that I found guilty, every guilty man that I punished, seemed to me a living proof, a proof constantly renewed that I was not some hideous exception. Alas! The whole world is wicked, madame, so let us prove it and strike down the wicked man. Villefort uttered these final words with a feverish vehemence that gave them a kind of savage eloquence. Madame Danglars decided to try one last effort. "But," she said, "you tell me that this young man is a tramp, an orphan, abandoned by everyone." Too bad, or rather so much the better. Providence has ensured that no one will weep for him. But this is striking at the weak, monsieur. A weak man who kills. His dishonour will reflect on my house. Do I not have death in mine? Ah, monsieur, cried the Baroness, you have no pity for your fellow man. Well, I tell you now, there will be no pity for you. So be it, said Villefort, raising his hands in a threatening gesture towards heaven. At least put back this wretch's case, if he is arrested, until the next assizes. This will give us 6 months for people to forget. No, I cannot, said Villefort. I still have 5 days. The charge has been made. 5 days is more time than I need. And don't you realize, madame, that I too need to forget? Well, when I work, and I work night and day, there are moments when I no longer remember. And when I no longer remember, I am happy as the dead are happy. But that is far better than suffering. Monsieur, he has fled. Let him escape. To do nothing is the simplest kind of mercy. But I told you, it is too late. The telegraph was in operation at daybreak, and by now... Monsieur, said the valet, coming in. A dragoon has brought this dispatch from the Ministry of the Interior. Villefort seized the letter and hastily broke the seals. Madame Danglars shivered with terror. Villefort trembled with joy. Arrested, he cried. He has been arrested at Compiègne. It's over. Madame Danglars got up, cold and pale. Farewell, monsieur, she said. Farewell, madame, the Crown Prosecutor replied, almost joyful, and he showed her to the door. Then, returning to his desk, he struck the letter with the back of his right hand and said, There now, I had a fraud, I had 3 thefts, I had 3 cases of arson, all I lacked was a murder. And here it is. It will be a fine session. Chapter 100. The Apparition. As the Crown Prosecutor had told Madame Danglars, Valentine had not yet recovered. In fact, quite exhausted, she was keeping to her bed, and it was there, in her room, from Madame de Villefort, that she learned of the events which we have just described, namely the flight of Eugénie and the arrest of Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather Benedetto, as well as the charge of murder against him. But Valentine was so weak that the story did not perhaps have as much effect on her as it would have done had she been in her normal state. There were only a few vague notions and blurred images, and even these mingled with odd ideas and fleeting spectres born of her sick mind or drifting before her eyes, and soon even they vanished so that her personal feelings could resume with all their force. During the day, Valentine was still kept close to reality by the presence of Noirtier, who had his granddaughter brought to him and stayed with her, brooding over her with paternal eyes. Then, when he came back from court, Villefort in turn spent an hour or 2 with his father and his child. At 6 o'clock he retired to his study. At 8 o'clock Monsieur d'Avrigny would arrive, personally delivering the nighttime medicine that had been prepared for the young woman. Then Noirtier was taken away, A night nurse chosen by the doctor replaced everyone, and she herself retired only when, at around 10 or 11 o'clock, Valentine had fallen asleep. On her way down, this person gave the keys of Valentine's room to Monsieur de Villefort himself, so that no one could reach the patient except through Madame de Villefort's apartments and little Edouard's room. Every morning, Morel came to Noirtier for news of Valentine, but astonishingly enough, Morel seemed less anxious as the days went by. Firstly, although subject to extreme nervous excitement, Valentine improved day by day, and then had Monte Cristo not told him, when he rushed round to see him, that if Valentine was not dead in 2 hours she would be safe? Well, she was still alive, and 4 days had passed. The nervous excitement pursued Valentine even into her sleep, or rather into the state of drowsiness that for her followed wakefulness. It was now that, in the silence of night and the half-dark created by the night-light burning in its alabaster stand on the mantelpiece, she would see those passing shades that haunt the rooms of the sick and which fever shakes with its quivering wings. At such times she would imagine she saw either her stepmother threatening her, or Morel opening his arms, or beings who were almost strangers in her ordinary life, like the Count of Monte Cristo. In such moments of delirium, even the furniture seemed to move and wander about the room. This would last until 2 or 3 in the morning, when a deep sleep would overtake her and last until daybreak. It was on the evening after the morning when Valentine learned of the flight of Eugenie and Benedetto's arrest, and when, after being confused for a moment with the sensations of her own life, these events began bit by bit to leave her thoughts, and, following the successive withdrawal of Villefort, d'Avrigny and Noirtier, while 11 o'clock was striking on the clock of Saint-Philippe de Roule, and after the night nurse had given her patient the medicine prepared by the doctor and shut the door of her room and retired to the servants' quarters, where she was now shuddering as she listened to what the servants had to say, furnishing her memory with the dreary tales which for the past 3 months had passed back and forth in the antechamber of the Crown Prosecutor's house, that a peculiar incident happened in that carefully closed and guarded room. It was about 10 minutes since the night nurse had left. Valentine, a prey for the past hour to the fever which resumed every night, let her head continue beyond her control the active, monotonous, and implacable operation of the brain, which exhausts itself by constantly reproducing the same thoughts or giving birth to the same images. Thousands upon thousands of rays were leaping from the wick of the nightlight, all imbued with strange meanings, but suddenly Valentine thought that in its quivering light she could see her bookcase, which stood beside the chimney in a recess in the wall, open slowly, without the hinges on which it appeared to be turning making the slightest sound. At any other time Valentine would have grasped her silk bell-pull and tugged it, calling for help, but in her present situation nothing surprised her any longer. She was aware that all these visions around her were the product of her delirium, and she was convinced of it by the fact that in the morning no trace had ever remained of those spirits of the night, which vanished with the coming of day. A human figure appeared behind the door. Thanks to her fever, Valentine was only too familiar with this kind of apparition to feel afraid. She merely opened her eyes wide, hoping to recognize Morel. The shape continued to approach her bed, then stopped and seemed to be listening attentively. At that moment a ray of light from the nightlight played across the nocturnal visitor's face. "It's not him," she muttered, and she waited, convinced that she was dreaming and that the man, as happens in dreams, would disappear or change into someone else. However, she felt her pulse, and, feeling it beating rapidly, she remembered that the best way of making such unwanted visions disappear was to drink something. The coolness of the drink, which had been prepared specifically with the aim of calming such agitation, after Valentine had complained of it to the doctor, brought down her temperature, and so revived the normal operation of the brain. For a short time after drinking, she felt better. For this reason, Valentine reached out to take the glass on the crystal saucer on which it was standing. But while she was extending her shaking arm outside the bed, the apparition took 2 steps towards the bed, with more determination than ever, and came so close to the young woman that she could hear his breath and thought she could feel the touch of his hand. This time, the illusion, or rather the reality, went beyond anything that Valentine had experienced so far. She began to think she must really be awake and alive. She realized that she was in full possession of her faculties and began to tremble. The purpose of the touch that Valentine had felt was to stop her hand. Valentine slowly brought it back towards her. At this, the figure took the glass, went over to the nightlight and looked at the potion, as if trying to assess its clarity and transparency. Valentine was unable to take her eyes off him, though he seemed protective rather than threatening. The preliminary evidence given by the light was not enough. The man, or rather the ghost, for he walked so softly that the carpet muffled the sound of his steps, took a spoonful of the drink out of the glass and swallowed it. Valentine watched what was happening before her eyes with a deep feeling of astonishment. She was sure that all this would vanish and give place to another scene, but the man, instead of fading away like a ghost, came over to her and held the glass out to her, saying in a voice that was full of emotion, "Now, drink." Valentine shuddered. This was the first time that one of her visions had spoken to her in this vibrant tone. She opened her mouth to cry out, but the man put a finger to his lips. "Monsieur le Comte de Monte Cristo," she muttered. In the terror evident in the young woman's eyes, in the trembling of her hands, in the rapid movement that she made to hide herself under the sheets, one might have seen the last struggle of doubt against certainty. However, the presence of the Count of Monte Cristo in her room at such an hour, and this mysterious, fantastic, inexplicable entrance through one of the walls, seemed impossible to Valentine's understanding. "Don't call out. Don't be afraid," said the Count. "Don't even have the glimmer of a suspicion or the shadow of a doubt in your heart. The man whom you see before you, Valentine, and this time you are right, it is not an illusion, the man whom you see is the tenderest father and most respectful friend you could ever dream of." Valentine could not think of anything in reply. She was so frightened by the voice, which assured her of the real presence of the speaker, that she was afraid of adding her own to it. But her terrified look meant, "If your intentions are pure, why are you here?" With his extraordinary wisdom, the Count understood everything that was going on in the young woman's heart. "Listen to me," he said, "or rather look at me. See my red eyes and my face, which is even paler than usual. This is because for the past 4 nights I have not slept for a single moment. For the past 4 nights I have been watching over you, protecting you, guarding you for our friend Maximilien." A rush of blood suffused the patient's happy cheeks, for the name that the Count had just uttered removed the last trace of suspicion that he had inspired in her. "Maximilien?" Valentine repeated, so sweet did the name seem to her. "Maximilien, has he confessed everything to you, then?" "Everything. He told me that your life was his, and I promised him that you would live." "You promised him that I should live?" "Yes." "Monsieur, you have spoken of watching and protection. Are you a doctor, then?" "Yes, the best that heaven could send you at this moment, believe me." "You say that you kept watch?" Valentine said anxiously. "Where? I didn't see you." The Count waved towards the bookcase. "I was hidden behind that door, which leads into the house next door, which I have rented." Valentine, overcome with pride and modest shame, turned away her eyes and said in high alarm, "Monsieur, what you did was unexampled folly, and the protection you gave me is very likely an insult." "Valentine," he answered, "in all the long time that I watched, this is all that I saw. The people who came into your room, what food was prepared for you, what drinks were served to you. Then, if the drink seemed dangerous to me, I entered as I have just done, emptied your glass, and substituted a health-giving beverage for the poison, and that, instead of the death that had been prepared for you, made life run in your veins." "Poison? Death?" Valentine cried, once more imagining herself to be possessed by some feverish hallucination. "What are you saying?" "Hush, child," said Monte Cristo, putting his finger to his lips. "I said poison, yes, I said death, and I repeat it. But first, drink this." He took out of his pocket a phial containing some red liquid and poured a few drops into the glass. "And when you have drunk it, don't take anything else this night." Valentine reached out her hand, but hardly had she touched the glass than she pulled back in terror. Monte Cristo took the glass, drank half of the liquid in it, and offered it to Valentine, who smiled before drinking the remainder. "Oh, yes," she said, "I recognize the taste of my nighttime drinks, that water which helped to cool my chest and calm my mind. Thank you, monsieur, thank you." "This is how you managed to live for 4 nights, Valentine," the Count said. "But how did I manage? Oh, what painful hours I have spent! Oh, what dreadful torture you put me through when I saw the deadly poison poured into your glass, and was terrified lest you should have time to drink it before I could empty it into the fireplace." "Monsieur," said Valentine, at the height of terror, "so you were tormented by the sight of the deadly poison being poured into my glass. But if you saw the poison being poured, then you must have seen the person who poured it." "Yes." Valentine sat upright in bed, and, drawing the embroidered lawn nightdress up over her breast, which was whiter than snow, still damp from the cold sweat of her delirium, now starting to mingle with the still icier sweat of terror, she said, "You saw this person?" "Yes," the Count repeated. "What you are telling me, monsieur, is frightful. You want me to believe in something hellish. What, in my father's house, in my room, on my bed of pain, someone is still trying to kill me? No, monsieur, begone. You tempt my conscience and blaspheme against the goodness of God. It is impossible. It cannot be." "But are you the first person this hand has struck, Valentine? Did you not see Monsieur de Saint-Marin, Madame de Saint-Marin, and Barrois all succumb? Would you not have seen Monsieur Nortier follow them, if the treatment which he has been receiving over the past 3 years had not protected him, overcoming poison by the habit of poison?" "Good heavens," said Valentine, "that is why, over the past month, my dear grandfather has insisted on my sharing all his drinks." "Those drinks," Monte Cristo asked urgently, "do they have a taste like that of partly dried orange peel?" "Bless us! Yes, they do." "That explains everything," said Monte Cristo. "He, too, knows that there is a poisoner here, and perhaps who that poisoner is. He protected you, his dearly beloved grandchild, against the deadly substance, and this substance lost its power when it met this initial defence. That is why you are still alive, which I could not understand after you were subjected 4 days ago to a poison which is usually unrelenting." "But who is the poisoner? The murderer?" "I might ask you in your turn. Have you never seen anyone come into your room at night?" "Yes. I have often thought I saw shadows pass, come close, go away and disappear. I thought they were hallucinations produced by my fever. Just now, when you came in, well, for a long time I thought I was delirious or dreaming." "So you do not know who is trying to take your life?" "No," said Valentine. "Why would someone wish me dead?" You will find out, Monte Cristo said, listening carefully. How? Valentine asked, looking around in terror. Because this evening your fever and delirium are gone, you are entirely awake, and midnight is striking. This is the murderer's hour. My God, Valentine said, wiping the sweat from her brow. Midnight was indeed striking slowly and mournfully. It was though each blow of the bronze hammer struck the young woman's heart. Valentine, the Count went on, call up all your strength, control your heart in your breast and your voice in your throat, pretend to be asleep, and you will see, you will see. Valentine grasped his hand. I think I can hear a noise, she said. Hide yourself. Farewell, or rather, au revoir, the Count replied. Then, with such a sad, fatherly smile that the young woman's heart was filled with gratitude, he slipped back on tiptoe to the door in the bookcase. But as he turned before closing it behind him, he said, Not a movement, not a word. You must seem to be asleep, or you will be killed before I can reach you. And with this terrible warning, the Count disappeared through the door, which closed silently behind him. Chapter 101. Locusta. Valentine was left alone. 2 other clocks, lagging behind that on Saint-Philippe de Roule, again struck midnight at different intervals. Then, apart from the noise of a few distant coaches, all was quiet once again. Now Valentine's attention was entirely concentrated on the clock in her room as its pendulum marked off the seconds. She began to count these seconds and noticed that they were only half as rapid as the beating of her heart. Yet she still had doubts. Inoffensive as she was herself, Valentine could not imagine that anyone wanted her dead. Why? To what end? What harm had she done that could have earned her an enemy? There was no fear of her falling asleep. One idea, one terrible idea, kept her mind on edge. There was, in the world, someone who had tried to kill her, and would try again. Suppose this time the person, tired of seeing the ineffectiveness of the poison, decided, as Monte Cristo said, to have recourse to cold steel. Suppose the Count did not have enough time to reach her. Suppose her last moment had come, and she would never again see Morel. At this thought, which made the blood drain from her face and covered her in a cold sweat, Valentine was ready to grasp the bell-pull and call for help. But it seemed that, through the door in the bookcase, she could see the Count's eyes shining, and the eyes weighed on her memory. When she thought about them, she was overwhelmed with such shame that she wondered whether gratitude could ever manage to efface this unfortunate aspect of the Count's indiscreet friendship. 20 minutes, 20 eternities passed in this way, then 10 minutes more. Finally, the clock, 1 second early, struck against the bell. At that moment, the faintest scratch on the wood of the bookcase told Valentine that the Count was watching, and advised her to do the same. Now, indeed, from the opposite side, that is towards Edouard's room, Valentine thought she heard the floor creak. She listened carefully, holding her breath. The door handle squeaked, and the door opened on its hinges. Valentine had raised herself up on her elbow, and only just had time to fall back into bed and hide her eyes under her arm. Then, trembling, anxious, her heart seized with unspeakable fear, she waited. Someone was coming over to the bed and touching the curtains. Valentine gathered all her strength and gave out that regular breathing that is the sign of untroubled sleep. "Valentine," a voice whispered. The young woman shuddered to the depths of her heart, but did not reply. "Valentine," the same voice repeated. The silence continued. Valentine had promised not to wake up. Then nothing moved. The only sound that Valentine could hear was the almost inaudible one of a liquid filling the glass that she had just emptied. At this, she dared to half open her eyelids behind the protection of her outstretched arm. She saw a woman in a white robe who was pouring a liquid out of a phial into her glass. For that brief moment, Valentine may have held her breath or made some movement, because the woman anxiously stopped and leant over the bed to see if she was really sleeping. It was Madame de Villefort. When she recognized her stepmother, Valentine was unable to repress a shudder that made the bed move. Madame de Villefort immediately slipped along the wall, and there, hidden by the bed curtain, silent, attentive, she watched Valentine's every movement. Valentine herself recalled Monte Cristo's dreadful words. In the hand that was not holding the phial, she thought she had seen a sort of long, sharp knife shining. So, summoning up all the power of her will, she tried to shut her eyes. But this operation of the most fearful of our senses, an operation that is normally so simple, and that moment became almost impossible to carry out, so strongly did eager curiosity struggle to push back her eyelids and discover the truth. However, reassured by the silence in which she could again hear, by Valentine's regular breathing, that she was asleep, Madame de Villefort once more reached out, and, half hidden behind the curtains which were drawn back to the head of the bed, finished emptying the contents of her phial into Valentine's glass. Then she left, without the slightest noise to tell Valentine that she was no longer there. She had seen the arm vanish, that's all. The fresh, plump arm of a woman of 25, young and beautiful, who was pouring out death. It is impossible to express what Valentine had felt for the minute and a half that Madame de Villefort was in her room. The scratching of a fingernail on the bookcase roused the young woman from the state of torpor into which she had lapsed, and which seemed like the numbness of sleep. She had difficulty in raising her head. The door, still silent, opened again on its hinges, and Monte Cristo reappeared. "Well?" he asked. "Do you still doubt?" "Oh, my God!" she muttered. "Did you see?" "Alas, yes." "Did you recognize her?" Valentine groaned. "Yes," she said, "but I cannot believe it." "Would you rather die, then, and kill Maximilien?" My God, the young woman repeated, almost distracted. "Can't I leave the house and escape?" "Valentine, the hand which is pursuing you will reach you wherever you go. It will bribe your servants with gold, and death will reach out to you under every disguise, in the water you drink from the spring, or the fruit you pluck from the tree." "But surely you said that my grandfather's precautions had given me immunity against poison." "Against one poison, and even then only if given in a small dose. The poison will be changed or the quantity increased." He took the glass and touched the liquid against his lips. "There you are," he said. "It is already being done. She is no longer using brucine to poison you, but a simple narcotic. I recognize the taste of the alcohol in which it has been dissolved. If you had drunk what Madame de Villefort had just poured into this glass, Valentine, you would have been lost." "But why in heaven's name is she hounding me like this?" she cried. "What? Are you so sweet, so good, so immune to thoughts of evil that you do not know, Valentine?" "No," the girl said. "I have never done her any harm." "But you are rich, Valentine. You have an income of 200,000 livres, and you are taking this money away from her son." "What? My fortune is not his. It comes from my parents." "Indeed. That is why Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Marin died, so that you would inherit from your parents. That is why, on the day he made you his heir, Monsieur Noirtier was condemned. And that is why you too must die, Valentine, so that your father can inherit from you, and your brother, now an only child, can inherit from your father." "Edouard? Poor child! Is it for his sake that all these crimes are being committed?" "Ah, you do understand at last." "My God! As long as it does not all rebound on him." "You are an angel, Valentine." "But she has given up trying to kill my grandfather, then?" "She considered that, if you were dead, except in the event of disinheritance, the fortune would naturally revert to your brother, and that when it came down to it, the crime was pointless and doubly dangerous to commit." "How could such a plot have been hatched in the mind of a woman? Oh, my God!" "Remember Perugia, the arbour at the post-house, and the man with the brown cape whom your stepmother was asking about Aqua Tofana? Well, it was at that time that this whole infernal plot was born in her head." "Oh, monsieur!" the sweet young woman cried, bursting into tears. "I can see in that case that I am condemned to die." "No, Valentine, no. I have provided against every intrigue. Our enemy is vanquished now that we know her. No, Valentine, you will live. Live to love and be loved, to be happy and to make a noble heart happy. But if you are to live, you must trust in me." "Tell me, monsieur, what must I do?" "You must blindly follow my instructions and take what I tell you." "As God is my witness," Valentine exclaimed, "if I were alone, I should prefer to let myself die." "Don't confide in anyone, even your father." "My father is not a part of this frightful plot, is he, monsieur?" Valentine said, clasping her hands. "No, yet your father, as a man used to juridical accusations, must suspect that all these deaths in his family are not natural. It is your father who should be watching over you, who should now be here in my place, who should already have emptied this glass and have taken action against the murderess. A spectre as a spectre," he murmured, completing his sentence aloud. "Monsieur," Valentine said, "I will do anything to live, because there are two beings in the world who love me enough to die if I should die, my grandfather and Maximilien. I shall watch over them as I have watched over you." "Very well, then. Do what you will with me," said Valentine. Then she added more softly, "Oh, my God, what is to become of me?" "Whatever happens, Valentine, have no fear. If you are in pain, if you lose your sense of sight, hearing, or touch, fear nothing. If you should wake up without knowing where you are, do not be afraid. Even if when you awoke you were to find yourself in some tomb-like crypt or nailed into some coffin. Summon your strength and think, at this moment, a friend, a father, a man who wants my happiness and Maximilien's is watching over me." "Alas, alas, what a dreadful extremity!" "But, Valentine, would you prefer to denounce your stepmother?" "I'd rather die 100 times. Oh yes, I'd rather die." "You shall not die, and promise me that, whatever should happen to you, you will not complain. You will have hope?" "I shall think of Maximilien." "You are my dear child, Valentine. Only I can save you, and I shall." Valentine, at the height of terror, realizing that the moment had come to ask God for strength, put her hands together and sat up to pray, muttering a jumble of words and forgetting that her white shoulders had no covering other than her long hair, and that her heart could be seen beating under the fine lace of her nightdress. The Count gently touched the young woman's arm, drew the velvet counterpane up to cover her neck, and said with a paternal smile, "My child, believe in my devotion as you believe in the goodness of God and the love of Maximilien." Valentine gave him a look full of gratitude and remained as docile as a child under the bedclothes. The Count took his emerald pillbox out of his waistcoat, raised the golden lid, and emptied a little pastille the size of a pea into Valentine's right hand. She took it in her other hand and looked closely at the Count. The face of her fearless protector wore a look of divine majesty and power, while on Valentine's there was clearly a question. "Yes," he told her. Valentine put the pastille to her lips and swallowed it. "And now, goodbye, my child," he said. "I am going to try and sleep, because you are saved." "Do," said Valentine. "Whatever happens to me, I promise I shall not be afraid." Monte Cristo remained looking at the young woman for a long time as she gradually fell asleep, overcome by the power of the drug that the Count had just given her. Then he took the glass, emptied 3/4 of it into the fireplace so that it would seem as though Valentine had drunk the missing portion, and put it back on the bedside table. Finally he went back to the door behind the bookcase and disappeared, after a final glance towards Valentine, who was sleeping with the confidence and candour of an angel lying at the feet of the Lord. And there I think we shall end for tonight.